Hey everybody, welcome in once again to the Weekly Wellness Podcast here at My Pets Wellness. My name is Kevin Crispin. I am the Chief of Staff for My Pets Wellness. It's great to have you in there. Now, if you've watched before, usually you'll see me with our Director of Wellness and Personal Growth, Dr. Rodney. Well, Dr. Rodney is not there today. We have a very special spotlight edition with our co-founder, Dr. Jessica Miller. How are you doing, Dr. Miller?
Good, thank you. How are you doing, Kevin?
Oh, I'm doing okay, thanks. Can't complain. Got a few notes. I want to kind of discuss a lot of things about your path in the veterinarian field and how you got into it, some of the challenges you faced within that field, and then kind of when talking about when you moved on to own your own practice and now that you've co-founded this company.
Sure, that sounds like a very short answer to give.
Yes.
Okay, all right. I'll give you the abbreviated version.
No. That was an outline. I'll start. So, tell me about how you got into vet medicine. How about that?
Sure.
We'll break it down.
So, well, I started working in veterinary hospitals from a very early age. So I started at age 16 working in the kennels, so cleaning kennels. And then in high school, I took AP Bio and I discovered I really loved biology. I'd always had an interest in animals, so veterinarian was always on my list of dream jobs, back when I was a little kid, not really understanding what that meant. But then once I took biology and I really understood the love of science, I figured, okay, well, biology, veterinary medicine, animals all comes together.
Sure.
And so I decided to pursue a career in that. So I worked so many jobs with animals, everything from, veterinary clinics to the Denver Zoo, the Shed Aquarium. I worked in a bunch of places getting a lot of different experience. And then went on to veterinary school, graduated, worked at a few different hospitals, and then I started doing house calls. So I worked at a few hospitals and then decided to go out on my own. Did house calls for a year until I got my first brick and mortar location.
And just to clarify, you mean like you literally went into people's houses and treated the pet at their home?
So I did.
Tell me a little bit more about that experience.
So house calls is very unique. It's very personal.
Yeah.
You are literally just have your big bag. It literally, we called it veterinarian in a bag. It was a rolling duffel that I'd roll up to each house. And what was nice is I could really do almost anything you can at a veterinary hospital, minus procedures, like surgery and dentistry.
Right.
But I could do vaccines, wellness care, blood draws, things like that. So I would go into their homes, provide veterinary care, and then eventually I did need that physical space so I could provide those other services like surgery and dentistry.
And when you came out of vet school and you started practicing on the house calls and then you moved into, as you said, the brick and mortar, what were your expectations of what being a veterinarian would be like?
So, well, I think before even doing house calls, starting off in veterinary medicine, definitely I think everybody probably starts off more idealistic. Okay. In kind of the sense of, okay, we can save them all, meaning, aggressive pets or pets with very severe conditions. You just really want to help them all and save them all. For certainly you get more experience, and I wouldn't say it's disillusionment, more just there's a little bit of a reality check there, coupled with sometimes a little bit of disillusionment. You realize your limitations.
Okay.
As a veterinarian or as a practitioner.
I like that phrase that you used, want to save them all. Was there a time where you definitely thought, okay, this is a situation where, okay, I'm going to step in, I'm going to make sure, and it didn't work out the way that you thought it would?
Certainly. There's a couple instances I can think of with that. One was I was working in a practice and someone came in to euthanize their cat, who was this beautiful, long-haired, looked like a Siberian cat.
Beautiful.
It was beautiful, middle-aged with diabetes.
Okay.
And the owner was bringing it in to euthanize, and I I felt at the time that it was more of a convenience euthanasia, that they didn't want to deal with the diabetes, and so were euthanizing their cat. And I didn't want to do that. And so I, asked my boss if, I could ask the owner if they could relinquish the cat to me in the hopes of getting it regulated with its diabetes, and then we could find it a new home.
You would become the owner of the cat in the interim.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Correct. Okay. And so, the owner agreed, and both owners of the practice and the owner of the cat agreed. So I took on this cat, and then discovered that, in fact, this cat, this was a new client. And so I was unfamiliar with this patient. And so after working with this cat, discovered how difficult it really was to regulate this cat's diabetes. Yeah. And sadly, the cat did end up passing away. And again, I was dealt a good dose of reality in just that sometimes it's not really convenience, why owners are euthanizing these difficult cases. Sometimes it really is that there are limitations financially and emotionally that people can handle.
Yeah. So another great phrase that you just used was a dose of reality. And I imagine you coming out of vet school, you want to save them all. You're very optimistic. You're an idealistic idea. That doesn't make any sense. You're very idealistic. How's that? Okay.
Sure.
So when you have situations like this, and then you kind of feel that dose of reality and your optimism is shaken, what was the result of that for you in practicing veterinarian medicine?
So I think there becomes a little bit of a, again, you're in this very happy-go-lucky state, and just the realities of the limitations and the frustration that can create, because it can create frustration in you and your abilities as a doctor. In addition to these medical cases, there also are a lot of behavioral situations that we face. For instance, aggression. Granted, aggression in dogs or cats, granted, there's a spectrum,
sure,
of aggression. You have dogs or cats that you would call maybe just a little testy, and sometimes you got those tiny little sharky chihuahuas or what have you that are yipping and yapping or snapping, and then you have really serious aggression where you have large animals who can do a serious amount of damage.
Yeah.
And it takes experience to realize what, again, limitations are with that. I can think of a case again where I was a very young new vet, and again, a very young animal came in to be euthanized. I think this dog was only a year old, and
wow,
was going to be euthanized because of biting. But in my exam room, this dog seemed friendly. This dog was licking me, sweet. I didn't see the aggression. So again, I asked the owner if they would relinquish it to me. Mm-hmm. I was working with a shelter at that time, a rescue, and said, listen, let me see if we can find a different situation for this dog where, maybe that aggression wouldn't show itself. But sadly, once the rescue took the dog ended up biting one of the handlers at the rescue very seriously. And again, had to be euthanized. And I felt tremendously guilty that I had taken on this dog, and this dog had in fact caused harm, to somebody. Yeah. And so again, it's just this sense of sadness and frustration of you really want to be able to help them, and sometimes you just can't.
Yeah, that's hard. Sorry, I was just thinking through that, and I think when we as non-veterinarians, most of us are out there in the world, we have a perception about veterinarians that your job is all one thing or all another thing. What is interesting is I've gotten to know you and gotten to know working with veterinarians is that your days are kind of what you just felt there. and then it's followed immediately by like a new puppy or a new kitten, and you have just really put all that you have into that. Can you talk about what it's like to go through those days, those ups and downs of a normal veterinarian day?
Sure. I think that as a veterinarian, you've got a lot of emotional roller coaster that
Yeah.
can go on throughout the day because you do have these cases which are very happy and exciting of the fluffy new puppies and kittens. And then your very next appointment can be a euthanasia. And maybe it's a euthanasia of a pet that that's been a client of yours for years, or maybe it's just a situation that's a fairly new patient or not that, again, is experiencing these behavioral issues that, again, you're kind of having to make sometimes these life or death decisions, figuring out what the degree of severity of what constitutes need and what you will or will not do in your own practice. For instance, do I euthanize this aggressive dog that they're not showing me aggression at this time, but I've got to take the owner's word for it? Or, a pet that you have to euthanize that maybe you feel that more can be done medically, but the owners financially can't afford that. So again, there's this emotional roller coaster that you have to deal with. And then you also have to be there as a leader in your practice, because your support staff is looking to you for the tone that you're going to set of professionalism, and the tone that you're going to set in terms of, you need to be empathetic to the client, but you also have to be strong and professional. So there's that line that you have to toe.
I love that the thought of excuse me, setting that tone with the support staff, being that leader. And one thing that you mentioned was sometimes the financial part of it becomes kind of I don't want to say, I guess I'll say it, a butting of heads, and where you feel like you want to help that animal, but there's also the reality of practicing this medicine and the cost that goes along with it. And I think you had said just a moment ago, being firm, but also caring. Is that kind of what you mean? Kind of being firm and like, this is what I'm able to provide for you, but this is the reality of how we can provide it. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, exactly. Is that you want to appear empathetic, but at the same time, you have to be professional in sometimes stating the facts of the case.
Yeah.
And for instance, you might have a parvo puppy, and parvo is a very deadly disease. Puppies can very easily die from this. And if you've got a parvo puppy that comes in, you may or may not be able to save it regardless of what you do. But easily that puppy could cost thousands of dollars in medical care, and you don't know what the outcome is going to be. And so you have to lay out those facts for the owners and allow them to make that decision. And that can be very difficult because those are difficult, literally life or death decisions, that sometimes finances play a very big part on what their ability is to go forward.
Yeah.
And sometimes too, you're also dealt with this situation of sometimes owners want you to give away your services for free. They're like, well, I want to do this. Can't you cut me a deal? Can't you not charge me for this or what have you, or give me a discount? And that's so difficult. And there's so many veterinarians that do a lot of that, but to the detriment of their practice and their employees. Because at the end of the day, if we didn't get paid for our services, then we're not able to offer our staff and therefore our clients what we ideally would like to be able to offer them, because we can't pay our bills.
Yeah. And it's probably not something, at least in my experience, I would say to, say, a medical doctor of a human. I wouldn't say, well, come on, my ears are not that expensive. You can clean them or whatever for less, right?
Right. Human medicine is lucky in that they've got that buffer. Well,
Yeah.
lucky or not lucky, depending on, your opinion, but they have that buffer of insurance. So they can look at their doctor
True.
and say, okay, well, this isn't your decision. This is my insurance company's decision. So they're not going to necessarily sit there and finagle over cost with their physician. But unfortunately, many clients do as veterinarians, and that contributes to guilt, on our parts.
Yeah.
Us feeling like, oh, I would love to be able to offer this less expensive, but I just can't.
Yeah.
And then you innately feel guilty about that, whether that's real or imagined, and that's a difficult thing to deal with.
And that's just another factor into that roller coaster that you're talking about. I imagine when you're done with the day, you go home. Obviously, any sort of doctor, I don't know if you're ever, quote, really done, but you probably get a lot of contact outside of work hours because, things come up. Owners and pet parents want to make sure that their pet is okay, and you want to be there for the patient. So does that add another dimension to the job, to that roller coaster aspect of the job? Do you think, and can you tell us like how you kind of are able to provide the care that you think is needed for the pet parent and the patient while also taking care of yourself?
Absolutely. I think that as a veterinarian, certainly I learned that I had to set boundaries for myself as well as my clients. I had to figure out, well, I have 2 small children, and so my children have demands on my time and energy as well. And so I needed to be there for them. And so that means that I can't always take phone calls at all hours.
Yeah.
Certainly we would love to be able to pick up the phone when a client calls all the time, but then again, that would be at the detriment to ourselves, because then we don't get any time away, both physically and mentally, to recharge or to take care of ourselves, be with our families, or just doing whatever we need to do to take care of ourselves mentally.
Yeah, and I think going through that roller coaster day, I imagine if you're the only doctor there that day, and let's say you have a full slate of appointments, it's just one appointment to the other, and then you probably have blood tests that you're looking into, and you got to call owners back, and sometimes you have to give them, unfortunately, bad news based on that blood test, etc. And then to go home and then continue, to work on that would be draining. You use the term recharging. It's like, when can you recharge?
Yes, absolutely. And you really need to decompress. I mean,
Okay,
we would say this a lot. We need to go home and decompress. For me personally, I would end the day and I would be so amped up because again, I'm not only physically running from appointment to appointment, but I'm also mentally have to be so on because mentally I'm figuring out these medical puzzles. And then I have to be on just emotionally because you're interacting with clients, you are connecting with clients. So you are just on so much continually throughout the day that for me, when I got home, it would take me a few hours to decompress, relax, and feel like I could come down from the day.
Right. So as we mentioned at the top of the show, you also owned your own or started your own practice, and all your experience you had with the house calls, with the other businesses that you worked in, kind of losing some of that idealism. What were some of the things that you as an owner of the practice and also a practitioner wanted to make sure for you, not only yourself, but your entire staff, knowing your experience of going through these days of the roller coaster days, going through the balance that you wanted to make sure was in place that maybe you hadn't had before?
Certainly. So because I owned a small animal practice and we were a relatively small business in the grand scheme of things, we did have a number of doctors and employees, but we were a single entity, not a national corporation. And so we had limitations. We had limitations in regards to the health insurance we were able to provide. We had limitations in what services I could offer to my clients because we just didn't have the bandwidth. We didn't have the financial resources. We didn't have the time, resources. The advantage of now being part of a larger company is that we do have more financial bandwidth and just people who can help us implement these things that I want to implement, so we can be able to offer more in terms of wellness care for the employees, which includes mental wellness, which is so important in our profession, as well as offering more things in terms of flexible scheduling. There's just a lot more opportunities there that I couldn't offer. There were limitations being a small practice.
Yeah, and I think we can all, in one way or another, appreciate the stress that veterinarians are under, especially after having this conversation and understanding, the ups and downs of the day, the pressures you put on yourselves as you go in and you want to make sure that you take care of that patient. I guess my last question for you today would be, as you've over the years of being a doctor, what do you think was the best thing for you in order to be able to practice during the day the best that you can, and then decompress and be good to yourself outside of work?
I think the biggest thing for me is that I really tried to finish my day of work at work. So meaning that I got my records done, I did my callbacks during the day, and when I left the office, I left it at the office.
Yeah.
I stopped taking, phone calls from clients after work. And my staff and my clients really came to realize, listen, when I am away from the office, I am out of the office. And I'm mostly unavailable. And I had to set those boundaries for myself and stick to those boundaries so that I could have more of that work-life balance, where when I was at work, I gave 100% of my effort when I was at work, and when I was at home, I was able to be at home and focus on my family or myself when I was at home.
Yeah. And if anybody's tuned into any of our other wellness podcasts, that's not an easy thing to do, right? And that takes a lot of work and a lot of balance. So, Dr. Miller, thank you so much for your time today. And as always, it's a pleasure to speak with you. And I think just what you had to share is really illuminating, not only about being a veterinarian, but just about trying to be a person in this world. So thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Kevin. It was great to be here. And thank you, everybody else, for tuning in, of course. We are here every Wednesday at mypetswellness.net. And we look forward to seeing you again at our next episode. Thanks, guys. Bye.